Hey everyone, welcome back, or for those who are new to the channel, I'm Emily, I'm 19 and I'm a modern languages student in German and Chinese. I would like to share with you my thoughts on the best way to create an effective language learning study plan. In my opinion, there is 6 key things that make a good study plan when you're learning languages. So I'm going to try and share those with you and give you some examples, including my study plan for the first part of this year and examples of other study plans. One thing's for certain, one study plan does not fit all. So what I do as a university student who studies modern languages full time is certainly not going to fit for someone who has a 9-to-5 job or someone who has to go to school and study loads of other things, 8 till 3:30. So I'm going to look at different ways you can create a study plan that you can apply to your own situation. So the first thing you obviously have to do is work out how much free time you have. And there's two facets to this. It's not just physically how much free time you have, because you might have 24 hours of the day free, but you really can't study modern languages 24 hours of the day. So you've got to try and think about it from both how much literal free time you have and how much free time you have that you can mentally put your best language learning effort into that time. I personally have quite a lot of free time throughout my day to learn languages, seeing as a lot of the time that I don't have free is also meant to be spent learning languages. The only thing I have to do in my day 100% that isn't learning languages is study for the other modules I have in my degree, like history or literature, that aren't specifically language based and maybe require other studying. But the rest of my time, within reason, I can devote to learning languages. But obviously I'm not going to spend 24 hours a day. I've got to sleep, I've got to eat, and I also want to do fun things, hang out with my friends, hobbies. So you've got to think about it holistically. Just need to work out how much time you have and what works for you. The next thing you need to know is how many languages are you going to study? And I know it sounds like a stupid question, and you probably know how many languages you're studying, but you have to be realistic. So tip number 1, do not try and study 3 beginners languages at once. It's just not super helpful to you. That doesn't mean you can't learn lots of languages simultaneously, that's obviously possible, but if you try to learn 3 beginners languages all at exactly the same time, while there might be benefits to this, I think the negatives massively outweigh it. In fact, it's proven, most university courses won't let you study for modern languages 2 beginners languages at the same time, and their reasoning for that would be the same reason. I believe that it's confusing. If you're studying exactly the same topics in 2 languages at the same time, it's confusing. So maybe get to A2 or B2, whatever you think works for you in another language, before starting out with the other one. Which sort of links into the point that you need to not just think about what languages you're studying, but how the order of priority you have for those languages. And I definitely think you should have main focuses and lesser focuses if you're studying more than 2 languages. So for me, for sure, the languages I have at university, German and Chinese, are always going to outweigh Korean and Japanese in priority. And Korean's going to outweigh Japanese in priority because it's just the language I want to learn first, it's the language I'm more interested in. The next component I think is super important to a study plan is having set blocks of time you use to contain your study within. I would recommend the Pomodoro technique, so 25-minute blocks of studying with 5 minutes in between and then a longer break ever so often, especially if you're planning a large block of studying, say on a Saturday. If you have a free Saturday and you really want to be ambitious and study 4 hours that day, you definitely need to block it in some way. And the examples I'm going to show you later are going to use this Pomodoro blocking technique on how to plan your language learning generally for that part of the year. Especially as I think you shouldn't plan your whole year. Definitely stop every 2-3 months, look back and think about what your priorities are, because after 3 months your priorities might have changed. The last thing to make sure you have in your plan is variety. There's no point in just planning to study textbook lessons 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days a week. That's so boring and it doesn't even help you that much. You need to remember that languages have 4 key skills. You have reading, listening, writing and speaking. And you want to try and get largely these 4 things into your routine. Speaking is probably the hardest one to get in if you don't have any friends in that language or you don't take a class in that language. And if you're a total beginner, while speaking helps, it might not be the thing you can achieve because you might not want to put the money into a class or the time into finding a friend, especially when you can't speak the language at all. So working out what you need and when can be hard, but make sure you have things like listening, so podcasts, or actively watching TV, so looking up words you don't know. or reading an article, not just doing like grammar exercises from a textbook and learning vocab, because these things are great, but you need to be able to use real life examples. But especially if you're at an intermediate level, making sure that you're using real life material is so much more useful to you than just using a textbook, because textbooks are great. I definitely think you need a textbook. My German course at university doesn't use a textbook and I hate it. I bought myself my own textbook. I think textbooks are super essential, but don't just use a textbook. So my first example is going to be me. I think it's the easy example to give because it's one I can talk about, but not the best one, so we'll have other examples than just me. Trying to apply it to everyone, not just very specific language learners. So for me, and I would also suggest this to other people with a lot of free time, I've made a schedule. Schedules can be hard to stick to, but if you have such a large period of free time, if you have like hours a day where the only thing you have to do in that day is 30 minutes, and sometimes the only thing I have to do that day, like scheduled in time-wise, is 30 minutes. The rest of it is study that I have to do or study I want to do, but it's not having to be done at a specific time. Therefore, I maybe don't take it seriously unless I make a schedule. So I've made a schedule. I've put my scheduled lessons in bold, so when I have to do a Zoom call, it's in bold, because I know I have to do those things. And then I've planned my lunch and my breaks around it, making sure I take at least a half an hour break for every 75 minutes of study. On the timetable it looks like 90, but with the 5-minute breaks, 75. Then, when I've planned all my language study into my timetable, I make a separate page for it with a little timetable. So here we have my one for German class, and I'm clearly here going to study German on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, and maybe Sundays. So the things in grey are optional. So there's some parts of my study timetable, anything after dinner, essentially, because I don't always want to work after dinner, it's optional. Those are things I don't think I have to do, but it'd be great if I could do them. So optional study is also something to think about, making sure that there's a bit of flexibility there, like I don't have to do this, but it would be great if. Not always having things you have to do. Obviously, there is things I have to do. I am studying for a university degree, so the same way if you're going to be studying for the TOPIK or the JLPT, there is going to be things you have to do. So on Tuesday, for example, where it says AMT, that's my Arbeit mit Texten class, and that's a German class I have in university. I have to do the work for that, so I'm going to have to dedicate those hours of study that day for that. On Wednesday, speaking class, or where it says grammar, that's my grammar class, I have to do those things. But in the grey area, where it says Harry Potter, that's where I'm going to read Harry Potter in German. That's something I'm going to do for fun, to expand my language learning. Where it says textbook is the textbook I bought for myself, as I mentioned before. I love a textbook. My German professors don't seem to love a textbook as much, but I think that having a core textbook to practice grammar exercises in is always super useful. Here I also have my study plan for Korean. So this is more aimed at self-study, well, totally aimed at self-study. I don't have a teacher for Korean. I might invest in the future in lessons on like Italki, but at the moment I am not looking for a teacher. So this works well if anyone's looking at how they plan self-study. So I am going to study Korean on Monday, Wednesday, Friday and Sunday. And so again, Sunday, optional in grey. But I have my textbook work, for example, Anki. Anki's, if you don't know, it's a vocab learning site. Well, you can use it for anything. It's just spaced repetition. So the learning curve, it's a bit hard to explain in short, but if you want me to go into that later, I can. But most people know what Anki is, I suppose, if you learn languages. So good for vocab, and it's good to plan learning in vocab. I feel like for me, one of the things I always forget to do is learn vocab. I love grammar so much, I forget about vocab, so I really pack in vocab. And so that's something to think about, and we'll go into that in the examples, that you need to think about your gaps in knowledge and what works for you. So I've got a lot of grammar here, and a lot of vocab. Anki to revise the vocab I know. As I said, I know quite a lot of vocab for Korean, but the textbook is very textbook heavy here, I suppose, because the grammar I don't know. I need to learn basic grammar. I know almost no basic grammar, and it's embarrassing at this point. Also, just quickly, something I forgot to add. Currently, on my timetable, where it says Japanese, I either won't do those sessions or I will do Korean there instead, because I am not going to be learning Japanese until I've got to a higher level in Korean, and I'm putting that benchmark at TOPIK level 2, but I feel like I probably will end up learning Japanese before that because I'll be so drawn to it. But I know that's a bad idea, so I'm going to try and hold myself back, and so I won't currently be learning Japanese in those slots. I just planned it out that way. So, on to my other examples. Here we have person A. They're someone who works a 9 to 5 job, so they're pretty tired at the end of the day, so they're only going to spend 1 hour each weekday on study, and maybe 2 on weekends. Their number one priority is Spanish. They've got a Spanish boyfriend, for example, so they really want to learn Spanish. Thai and Korean, they're sort of equal priority. Thai, they learned at school, they're already pretty far with it, and they want to keep it going, but they're not too worried about it. Korean, they're just really learning it for fun. They don't really know much Korean, but they want to learn like a bit. So those two are pretty like just for fun, really, which is great. Not all languages have to be serious language learning. The first thing they can do is block out when they want to study each language. So they're going to study Spanish every other day for 1 hour, apart from on Sunday for 2 hours. They're blocking out the second hour because they're going with the flexible optional route of having that choice to a second hour if they feel like it, but those things aren't going to be necessary. The reason they're definitely going to study 2 hours on Sunday is because they have their online lesson, so they need to really improve their Spanish, so they're going to have the online Spanish lesson on Sunday to keep moving them forward. They've got their textbook. For Thai, they've got reading an article, listening to a podcast, just keeping up those two core skills, reading and listening. And for Korean, they're just going to slowly go through their textbook. They're just having fun, learning a bit of grammar, learning a bit of vocab, just a slow pedal on through the textbook. And so that's what's worked for them. In their extra time for Spanish, they have, watch TV actively, make some vocab, read an article, do a podcast. It's not strenuous grammar work, it's just something extra they can do that will really help them in their free time. Person B goes to school, and while they're still quite busy, they feel like they have a bit more time to study than person A did. They're studying only 2 languages, Chinese and Japanese, but they're not beginners in either of these languages. They're more towards the intermediate level. So they are doing pretty intensive study for someone who goes to school for both of these languages. Chinese, they learn at school, so they are not too worried about having a speaking class for that, so they haven't got much speaking put into their routine. They've gone for podcast, TV show, textbook, just a lot of grammar, because they really want to further what they're learning at school. For Japanese, however, they don't have that school environment, so they make sure every Monday they're going to have a chat with their Japanese friend, so that they can keep their speaking going. They also have, what's different, test prep. They are interested in taking the JLPT N3, so they need to make sure they're focusing on test questions specifically for that, not just any other study. So I hope that explains everything for you. I'm sorry if this video is a bit long, but I wanted to comprehensively explain it all to you. And please like and subscribe and stay tuned for my next video. Thanks for watching. Bye!